Alrighty, you know that I'm all about exploiting our opponents. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to utilize PokerTracker and more specifically LeakTracker to find some weaknesses in your opponents. Alrighty, so on the screen right now is PokerTracker 4, and you can't see it because I have my picture covering it up, but if I move this down, you can see that we're currently on Wacky Wand, which is my screen name. We're going to cover it up in an effort to keep the innocent anonymous. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at one of our opponents who we have 4,600 hands on. And so I'm keeping my face over the name there so that you can't see his name. But as I show you how I utilize LeakTracker to dissect one of my opponents, you're going to be able to follow along with your own PokerTracker 4 right now. So let's do this. Pull up a new opponent or a specific opponent. Now, we got to switch to all dates. Now, this opponent, you can see I have 4,600 hands on this player. He is a $43 positive winner at 0.42 hands, I'm sorry, 0.42 big blinds per 100 hands. So it's a small amount, but he is a winner in our 4,600 hand database on this player. So the first step, if I want to think about how to exploit an opponent, the very first thing I normally do is I'll go to LeakTracker. Keep it set on the opponent that you want to do a little analysis on. And then once you have it, once you're on LeakTracker right here, click Run Analysis. Now you can see it just popped up 4,620 hands, more hands required for accurate results. And sure, the program wants you to have more hands so that the numbers are a bit more reliable. But over 4,000 hands, even over 2,000 hands, you can start to see patterns and tendencies of your opponents develop. Great, so the analysis just finished. The first tab is the overall tab, small, big, middle, all the different positions right there. But let's look at the overall first. So if you've never looked at LeakTracker, please give it a shot. Even before you sit and go in MTT players, once you play a few cash hands, you can run the analysis and look. But even if you don't play a lot of cash, a really interesting part of this page right here, once you click on a stat, stat information comes up, description, a formula, your value for the stat, and whether it's good or bad. Now, good or bad just means that you're falling within your average winning player's percentage range, right? So VPIP normally goes in this range right here for players. This particular opponent's VPIP falls right in the middle, so the stat is good. Now, that doesn't mean the player is a good player when it comes to VPIPing and voluntarily entering pots. It's just that the stat is a good-looking number. You need to dive further in to really find out if there's some opportunities there to exploit this opponent. So overall small and big, of course. Let's take a look. I looked at this opponent ahead of time to prepare me for this little video here. And one thing that I noticed was 3-bet. If you take a look at 3-bet, the determination is good, but it's 8.5% total, which is on the high side, so we are up against a loose, aggressive opponent right here. We can also see VPIP and PFR. You can see those two lines are really close together like that. If there's a high gap in between, that means there's a lot of calling hands within that within their ranges. But if the gap is really close, it means they like to do a lot more raises than they do calling. So we could see a loose aggressive player with VPIP and PFR, very close percentages right here. Let me show you one thing. In the big blind, we could see VPIP and PFR, those black lines, are really far apart. This person decides to use their big blind, the big blind they have in the pot. They decide to use that as kind of a discount to making the call. So they do a lot of calling in the big blind. But in the small blind, look at this. Bam! The small blind 3-bet percentage is way outside, a little bit far to the right? So if we click on it, it's a potential problem because they're 3-betting at 12.4%, which is quite high. Now, basically that's telling me that this player loves to do some 3-bet bluffing from the small blind, as opposed to the big blind where they're doing a lot of calling, utilizing that discount, probably to call with wider ranges, every pocket pair, lots of suited connectors, suited aces, Broadway type cards, suited gappers, stuff like that, most likely at least. Where I'm thinking is what I want to focus on today as far as exploits go is on the 3-bet range right here. Really high out of the small blind, and out of the big blind, not so high, on the lower side right here. So now that we have an area that we want to focus on, we could go through and take a look at all the stats and find other tendencies that we might want to explore. But one thing at a time, you know. Let's go on stats for this opponent. Now, we can see all 4,600 hands right here. Let's do a little filter for 3-bet pre-flop. Out of 4,600, we see 152 hands. Now, a really good thing for this player is that they are positive in profitability with 3-bets, not especially, only out of the blinds, I guess. Big blind and small blind, they're making some money. Now, we've already kind of determined that they use the big blind to do a lot of calling. They're 3-betting not that frequently, which means they're 3-betting in the big blind for value most of the time. And as we can see right here, only 25 hands. We've seen 4 showdown hands, because the whole cards are shown to us for this opponent. And they have a positive win rate of 1,348 big blinds per 100 hands, which, if you break that down, that's 13.4 big blinds per hand. Every time they 3-bet out of the big blind, 13.4 big blinds profit. So they're doing pretty good out of the big blind. Now, out of the small blind, great. They're making 241 big blinds per 100 hands, or 2.4. So at least they're profitable right here. But it's pretty obvious, out of the 4,600 hands, 65 in the small blind and only 25 in the big blind were 3-betting hands. So let's see if we can't find some patterns to their 3-bets. Actually, before we do that, let me pull up this little document right here because I've got some ideas. So normally, as I'm doing this kind of stuff, as I'm researching an opponent, right? So let's see, one. Out of the small blind, they are a 3-bet bluffer. They're a 3-bet bluffer for sure. Big blind, 3-bet for value is their general tendencies, right? Now, if we know that somebody is a 3-bet bluffer, what do you think are some exploits that we can do against them? First off, we can 4-bet bluff wider, especially with like suited ace hands and maybe like king, queen suited, and maybe even some pocket pairs that we would normally just call with or even just fold. We could open and then fold the pocket 5s, but seeing as how they're doing a lot of bluffing in the small blind, it might be a good idea to throw out a 4-bet bluff out of the small blind. If they call, we could still hit a set and get crazy value. We're in position on the flop. So there's a lot of reasons to possibly increase our 4-bet bluffing range right here. Let's see here. The other thing is we can call wider with a range ahead of their 3-bet bluffing range. So, for example, if the opponent does do a lot of 3-bet bluffing with like ace 4, ace 5, ace 7 suited, we can be calling with the ace jack and the ace 10 suited as well. Nope, not bad. Or ace queen, of course, too. And we could 4-bet or call with the ace king. Totally up to you. But these are some potential potential exploits against this small blind tendency. Now for the big blind tendency, they 3-bet for value out of the big blind. Perfect. So open your range in the cutoff and the button because they call way more frequently out of the small blind. So like I said, we could, if we wanted to, go through and filter for big blind calling hands to see what they call with. But we might want to open our range to have every single Broadway hand, especially if they're calling like every suited king and a lot of suited queens and jacks. It'd be great to have jack 10, jack 9, queen jack, queen 10, those kinds of hands in our range because we're ahead of maybe a lot of the range that they're calling with. So this is a potential exploit after we do a little bit more research into their calling hands. Now, the next one is we want to give respect to big blind 3-bets and fold most of our hands, especially our bluffing hands against them. So if we take a look first out of the big blind, we could see that from the hands that went to showdown, we've seen 3-bets with aces, kings, and jacks again. pretty obvious that they're three betting for value out of the big blind, at least when they end up getting to showdown. But let's take a look in the small blind here. We see a ton of different hands of all different ranges, all the way starting from 8-7 suited up to pocket aces. Of course, you expect the pocket pairs to be three betting right there. But a lot of these hands, ace-7, 9-10, queen-jack, king-jack, a lot of your opponents are just going to be calling with those instead, just to see the flop in hopes of hitting something big. But this opponent likes to use that small blind as a bluffing opportunity. So let's take a look. Sure, they three bet bluffed with king queen suited 10-9 8-7. Why did they end up losing so much with these hands right here? Let's take a look to see if we can't learn a little bit more about this opponent. All right. So you can see how I take notes as I do these kinds of studies, because if I don't take notes, I'm not going to remember this stuff. You know, this particular opponent, how am I ever going to remember when I see them a week, 2 weeks, even tomorrow? How am I going to remember these exploits, you know? So I've got to save notes. That's just how I do it. So we saw in this hand, the villain had king, queen suited, which was this hand out of the small blind right here. Let's see what happens. So we see a little over 4x, 3-bet to 13 big blinds. 8, 10, 10, couple of clubs, so a flush draw, and 61 cents, so that's less than a quarter pot bet. Flop flush draw, c-bet, 1/4 pot. 1/4 pot size bet. Okay, let's see what happens. Just face a call, okay. Comes a jack. No, we had king queen suited. Not we. Villain had king queen suited here. So is now open-ended and bet a little bit less than half pot. And we get a call. Okay. Turn open-ended straight draw. Bet half pot size bet. What happens on the river? 4 completely whiffed. Bet 623, which covers his opponent's bet right here. So what we can say is river, whiff, let's just say, and it was all in bluff. Cool. Good. All right, so let's see what happens. Opponent calls, king, queen, and then pocket queens. Makes sense. Oh, you know, this is an interesting hand too right here. We can make a note on this villain. Cash, UTG, was it? Yeah, UTG. Oh, no. Open call with queen, queen in position, which is good to note for the future. You know, not an automatic 4-better from this particular villain right here. So that's good to know. We saw a quarter pot size bet on the flop flush draw, turn open-ended half, so half pot, increase the bet a little bit, and a river whiff right here. Let's see what the next hand is. 10-9 suited right here. So with the 10-9, as we can see, villain is in the small blind. This is somewhere where we had 2,000 hands, 1.6. So early in our career with this particular villain. And you could see my hand was the 7 deuce offsuit, which I hope I fold. Good. 88 cents. Nice. So let's scooch. Keep losing that Word document. Here it is. Okay, perfect. So 9-8 suited. Is it 9-8? 10-9? Oh, 10-9. $10-9 a little bit smaller to 9 big blinds. Nine big blinds versus a min open. Okay, and we get a call. So we go to the flop, 9-10, flopping an open-ender plus the flush draw. You could see villain currently c-bet 75 and 78% of the time. Likes to double barrel this player right here. So we can expect definitely, if we call on the flop, we should be calling, not should be calling, but we should expect the turn double barrel for sure. Now this player folding 50% of the time, 3 out of 6. Okay, so it's a decent spot to be bluffing at right here. Let's see what sizing. 47. Once again, like 186? 25%. Okay. F gut shot. No. Open in a straight draw plus a flush draw. 1/4 pot size bet. This is interesting. A better draw on this flop, still out of position, but making the 1/4 pot size bet. Man, we get a call. Okay. The turn 10 comes, which gives us a pair, plus the open ender still, plus the flush draw still. 133, so a little less, right around half pot or so. 1/2 pot size bet. With 1 pair on turn. So we're following the same betting patterns, but now we do have a pair as opposed to just a straight up bluff. We have a little bit of bluff catching showdown equity here. The 8 comes and $1.22, $5. Why are you not trying to push your opponent off the hand? 122. What is that? Wow. Less than, I like this. 1/4 pot size bet on river whiff with showdown value. That's interesting. What does our opponent end up having? $1.22. Gonna call par with any pair. Pocket 9s can even call. Pocket 7s might call if they don't want to believe and it's a small bet. Ace Jack open and then call pre-flop with Ace Jack as well. That makes sense. So the 10-9 right there. Okay. So you can see how this is interesting. So with a little bit of showdown value by hitting that second pair on the turn, Villain, instead of betting a larger river bluff, it's more like a blocking bet or maybe even like a thin value. What are you getting thin value from? Ace? A random ace that decided to call? That seems more like a blocking bet. Like, I'm going to bet this so that my opponent, so that a raise is more costly. That's how it feels to me, this bet at least. Let's look at the 8-7 now. So 8-7, yep, 8-7 of clubs right there. So now we have 2.6K hands on our current villain. So 7-8, 8-7 suited. Is that right? Yeah, 8-7 suited. Queen Jack, I'm down with folding that. Under the gun, don't need to be opening. Oh, nice. Same size as that very first hand. 4x 3-bet to 13 big blinds. So that might be kind of a standard sizing. Versus a 3 big blind, maybe this opponent always makes it 13 big blinds. $1.30 get a call. 270 in the pot. Out of position 71 cents. That's just under 25%, right? 71 divided by 270. I'm at 25. 20 is just, okay, 26%. Makes sense. So 1/4 pot size bet with 7-8. So a gut shot. Interesting. So a very good draw out of position. We saw 1/4 pot. Flop flush draw, 1/4 pot. So every time out of position, we see 1/4 pot C bets. So that might make it a little tough to gauge that our opponent is bluffing or not, because we've seen with various kinds of hands, 1/4 pot. But it might be a good idea at some point to look at C betting when they flop a top pair hand out of position to see if it is a 1/4 pot still. Because then that could be a really good tell on this opponent. 196, oh, whoops, the 6 they called, okay. 412, so a little bit less than half pot again. So following the same bet pattern. Half pot size bet on a turn whiff. Get called. Now 804 in the pot, $6 behind, $38 behind over here. And then we see a shove. So putting your opponent all in with a total bluff, right? The 9 didn't complete any draws, didn't complete his draw. No draws on the board, didn't give him a pair. River, whiff. I'm just going to say all in bluff. Ace king, top pair, top kicker, able to double up right there, and then your bluff got picked off for sure. So let me see here. Seems to be triple barrel bluffer, but with showdown value, smaller river bet as a blocking bet. That's good. So how can we exploit this in our opponent right here? Triple barrel bluffer. So call down with bluff catching hands. Consider raising on the flop on hard to hit boards. So if we see on a board like this, King 6-4, sure, there are quite a few draws that can be had, right? 5-7 for an open ender, 6-5, 6-7 for a pair plus a backdoor, a couple of hearts. But a big part of villain's 3-betting range is going to whiff this, right? On pocket queens, jacks, ace queen, ace 5 suited, ace 7 suited. What were some of those other hands that we saw? King queen, king jack, queen jack totally whiffed just now. 10-9 whiffed, 8-7 pretty much whiffed, except for the backdoor draw and the gut shot. So a lot of our opponent's hands are going to be whiffing on a board like this, on this King 6-5 board. So really, it's a good opportunity right here. If we did have the queen jack, let's just assume that, you know, we had opened, faced a 3-bet and called. This would be a great spot against just a quarter pot bet to be throwing out that bluff raise right here for sure. So, of course, you know, there's a lot more that we can look into. Like I said, we can look at some C-betting hands and C-betting for value versus C-betting for bluffs, see what the sizings is. But this is just a really good way to show you how you can utilize LeakTracker to find, first, a tendency weakness, and then you go to the statistics tab and dig into various hands, dig into various scenarios to really drill down and figure out where your opponent's weaknesses lie to complete or to compile a list of exploits to use against them. And so now that you have your list of exploits, what do you do with them? The answer is pretty darn obvious. You get onto some tables with your target opponent. You have that list of exploits right in front of you, and then you look for every opportunity that you can find in order to utilize those exploits. So for this particular opponent, when we open and then they 3-bet us from the small blind, we should probably think about, before we even make that initial open raise, think about what we're going to do versus that expected 3-bet. And if they 3-bet against us from the big blind, well, if we have a value hand, great, we can re-raise aces and kings, maybe even queens, because we've seen pocket jacks in their 3-betting range. But we might want to throw away those pocket deuces, the ace 5 suited, that kind of thing, against their big blind 3-bet. Alrighty, thank you all very much. Good luck in finding exploits on your opponents, and then better luck putting them to use. Take care.